So I'm working on a game called Anti-Human, which is a top-down shooter that attempts to combine two normally opposing genres. One being spooky, scary horror games like Resident Evil, Cry of Fear, etc, etc. With the other being action-packed one-man army power fantasy shooters like Doom and Blood. But more so newer retro revival shooters like Dusk and Ultra Kill. A shooter game like this needs a kick-ass arsenal, and I tried loosely following a formula that worked while also doing my own thing at the same time. The aforementioned boomer shooters that inspired this game usually had a hierarchy of weapons, starting with a pistol or some weaker weapon that you don't often use later in the game unless you lose all of your weapons or run out of ammo. Then a shotgun, which is powerful and encourages close-range encounters but is riskier to use. Then an automatic weapon with low accuracy that enables mid-range combat. Then a precise and powerful weapon that's good at any range but has less ammo or limited use. And then the climax of it all, the specialist weapons. These are your rocket launchers, your grenade launchers, your BFGs, etc, etc. Anti-Human's first weapon is the revolver, a powerful and precise weapon with infinite ammo, but has a very slow fire rate, rendering it ineffective for big crowds or larger enemies. The shotgun is a cannon that fires shrapnel and acts like a pump shotgun at first, but can be pumped multiple times to act like an auto-shotty, or it can fire an overheated barrage of fiery shrapnel that costs more ammo. The mid-range automatic weapon is a flamethrower that sets enemies on fire and has a Molotov cocktail attack that the enemy AI will attempt to avoid to create area denial. The long-range weapon is a bit of an oddball. It's an assault rifle that shoots automatically at first, but you can switch it to a different mode that fires a laser that's precise but less efficient on your ammo. And the specialist weapon is a magic wand with many different attacks. A wind attack that can knock light enemies back, but also deflect some attacks, like this fireball. Or this lunge attack. Which is cheap on mana, but harmless in most situations. A lightning attack that will stun light enemies in a large radius but doesn't deal too much damage. The Demon Orb! The closest thing to a rocket launcher in the game, summoning this orb that explodes at your cursor and makes a directional explosion from that point, which is powerful and knocks enemies back, but pretty expensive on mana. And then the Black Hole, which absorbs any nearby enemies and then damages them repeatedly before exploding. It's the single most powerful attack in the game, but very expensive on your mana. Those were the weapons and what they do, and I'm definitely proud of the game's weapon design. I think most of them have their own niche and, mostly, complement each other well. I'll get into why mostly in a second. Which is especially good considering I wanted the limited ammo to encourage weapon switching, so you can't just snipe people with the ion rifle or run around with a flamethrower all the time. A mix of playstyles is encouraged instead, but back to that mostly part. The flamethrower and the ion rifle's automatic mode are essentially the same thing, dealing mid-range and rapid-fire damage, except the flamethrower completely outclasses the ion rifle entirely, in terms of rate of fire, DPS, and for the fact that it deals afterburn damage. I then added a pierce mechanic for projectiles, where instead of being this binary where it either deletes upon hitting an enemy or pierces everything like the old flamethrower did, every projectile now has a special pierce value and every enemy has a toughness value that decides if the incoming projectile will pierce or not. It was a great buff for the revolver and shotgun, having revolver bullets and the hot shrapnel pierce weak enemies. But I also thought it'd be a perfect nerf for the flamethrower, having only pierce one weak enemy and hit two at once at most. And I thought at that point, the ion rifle versus flamethrower debacle was settled. The flamethrower is for crowd control, and the ion rifle's automatic fire deals more DPS after I also nerfed the flamethrower's damage, so it would be for close range damage to a single enemy. But then I remembered that the shotgun existed and outclasses it in that department, so it was still completely useless. So now what? Do I remove the ion rifle's automatic mode and make it a laser rifle? No! The rule of cool is like gospel to me. There's already a lot of stuff I added in just because it was cool, including the mere existence of 2 modes on this darn gun. If there's something lame in my game, I won't just remove it. I will replace it with something better. Something cooler. So what's the problem with the flamethrower? Not only was it but it's really OP in the early stages of the game, and still kind of OP now. But why? Well, it has the rapid fire, plus the afterburn, plus the ability to hit multiple enemies, all combining to make it super powerful. So one of these has gotta go. But which one? Afterburn is absolutely not going. It's a damn flamethrower. Why would there not be afterburn? The ability to hit multiple enemies not only separates it from the ion rifle's automatic fire, but also mimics the true chaos of fire in real life, with how it engulfs the whole area. So that leaves the rapid fire to go. But how do you make a slow-firing flamethrower? The obvious answer was to make it shoot fireballs, so that's off because that's too easy. The real idea I'm gonna use takes inspiration from a few other games, the first being from Team Fortress 2. There's a weapon in TF2 called the Gas Passer, which creates this cloud that covers enemies in gas. When covered in gas, any kind of damage gives you full afterburn. Second, from Deep Rock Galactic. There's a weapon in DRG called the Sludge Pump, which covers enemies in corrosive goo. And there's a charge shot that makes it fragment into small chunks and hit multiple enemies. Finally, from Amid Evil. In Amid Evil, there's a weapon called the Voltride, which shoots electricity, and after killing an enemy with it, they have this special death animation before truly dying. But if you continue shooting them during that death animation, it overcharges their body and chains lightning to other nearby enemies. So flammable gas, goop shooter, and chain damage. Bam! That's the new idea. But I had to commit a horrible crime against humanity and make the first flamethrower in video game history that didn't actually shoot any fire. Instead, I added a new status effect to enemies, which is fuel. The new not flamethrower shoots the fuel itself at enemies, which if you didn't notice, the fuel is whiskey, in these big globs, which themselves pierce enemies and covers them in fuel, but when it reaches the cursor destination or hits the environment, it splashes and hits everything around in a radius. Entire groups of small enemies should be covered in a single hit. Big enemies might require a few shots. No, that's not an alcohol-based pun. As you might have guessed, any damage lights them on fire. This synergizes with the other weapons, especially those that actually hit multiple targets, like the revolver's piercing shot, and it can also be used to make explosives even more devastating. But when a fire-based attack hits an enemy, it not only lights them on fire, but it releases a small explosion that itself causes fire damage. So the idea is that you hit a whole group with fuel, light one on fire, and it creates a chain explosion through the whole crowd. But what's the best way to light them on fire? That's where the new alt fire comes in. So the Molotov attack has been moved to the tertiary attack button, and now the alt fire throws a lit match at enemies. The match itself does next to no damage and barely even does any fire damage, but that's not the point. The point is that it's a reliable way to start this chain reaction after oiling everyone up, at the cost of a few fuel points. Don't ask, I don't care. On top of that, shooting fuel at an already lit enemy causes the explosion. So the flamethrower became better at dealing with big enemies, with how, if you manage to light it up, you can hit it and hit it and hit it with the fuel and spam the explosion. You can even aim right behind the enemy, having the fuel glob and then the splash touch it, making it happen twice in one shot. And with that, the flamethrower has been unboringed and has a new purpose. Now, it's still a powerful crowd control weapon that's more reliable than explosives with the powerful afterburn effect, but the catch is that it's not actually great to use as a weapon on its own. So you need other weapons to make it work, or use the match attack, which costs a great amount of fuel. Not only do we fix a weapon that was so powerful you can play the whole game with it by itself, assuming you can find ammo, but we left some room in the role of a rapid-fire mid to close-range weapon. The flamethrower was more of a problem than the ion rifle's auto-fire, but that doesn't mean I'm not gonna change it. Mostly because it has the same problem as the flamethrower of So to spice it up, I took inspiration from a movement happening in video games. And that movement is what I'll call the screw overheat meters movement. Recently I've been noticing games turn overheat meters into a buff, or into something good. In Ultra Kill, there's a couple of weapons that overheat, and while overheated, you can shoot out a fiery version of the attack that also relieves the heat meter. In the aforementioned Deep Rock Galactic, there's weapon upgrades for some of the few weapons that overheat that can weaponize it. And very recently in Dead by Daylight, a certain chainsaw-wielding killer received a rework where the overheat meter, instead of disabling it for a lengthy period, now overcharges your chainsaw and makes you charge even faster. The Ion Rifle now has a heat meter, as you may have guessed. As the heat meter grows, your fire rate is much faster, but the problem is that it keeps getting more and more inaccurate as well. So it becomes a close-range shredder that even outclasses the shotgun, but it also shreds through your ammo, which is made even worse by the fact that it's less likely to hit something. So you can either keep the heat and fire like a maniac but go through ammo faster, or you can risk your heat meter and fire out this crescent wave for no ammo cost. The point being that the crescent wave is more powerful when standing back a bit, so if you actually want to stay at mid-range, you can fire at the moment the heat is full and the gun gets too inaccurate. Now for the focus mode. It wasn't really part of the problem, as it was the automatic fire that needed some tweaks, but now that I've made every weapon more interesting, the standards have raised and I need to spice it up as well. For the overheat on the focus mode, it slows down as it heats up instead of getting faster. So while the damage is the same, it has a longer time to kill. But it also increases in pierce value as it gets hotter. On top of that, at full heat, the lasers even bounce off of surfaces. So it becomes more efficient on ammo from being able to hit multiple targets, but also, if you're skilled enough, you can make the bouncing laser bounce back into the same enemy so you hit it twice. So now you have a dilemma between the alt fire, charging up a beam that pierces anything for 15 plasma but disables the weapon for a second, or getting the full overheat, which takes 5 shots and 20 plasma, but you can fire it repeatedly and bounce it off of walls. For the heat relief attack, I thought that because the automatic fire mode made you have to go to close range, the heat relief attack on that was more effective the further you stood, to contradict it, which I thought would add more versatility. So I'm doing the same for this, having a close quarters heat relief attack. So what does it do? It explodes in your face, of course. The only problem is that I sort of encouraged you to run headlong into crowds of enemies to take advantage of, because it's radial rather than something focused like the aforementioned Demon Orb explosion. So instead of reworking it to discourage you from doing that, I added a bigger payoff if you do so. So now the explosion has pretty big knockback as well as stunning enemies for half a second. Again, all at the cost of no ammo. So now there's a risk-reward scenario. Do you keep your distance and play it safe while taking advantage of the higher pierce, or go crazy, go stupid, Now we took two weapons that conflicted with each other and were pretty boring to use into more interesting versions that had special interactions and even increased the skill ceiling a bit. All because they committed a dreaded sin that I cannot let go of. Being lame. Okay, bye!